Alright, in this video we're going to add our first model to our application. So my application I'm creating is a to-do list or a list of tasks that I need to complete. So that is my first model. So we have Bootstrap installed from the last video, and we also have a couple of static pages, our home page and an about page. So now let's create our task model. So we're in our application folder, and we're going to use the generator to generate our model file. So we'll rels g, which is short for generate, and we're going to create a model. Now here's where you have to be really careful about whether you're going to use a plural name or a singular name. So models are always singular names, so you just want to create one of them. So whatever model you're creating, make sure you use a singular name for that. So I'm going to call mine task, and my task is going to have a name, and I want that to be a string. So this is the database type. So after the colon you put the database type. So string is a varchar, but by default if you don't put any database type after that, then it becomes a string, so you don't have to include that. Then I'm going to have a due date, which is a date time, and finally a priority, and that will be an integer. Okay, and so I'll run that generator. Now before you run this generator, make sure you've typed everything correctly, because it's kind of a pain to go back and edit that. Now in the first video with the scaffolding, I showed you with the migrations how before you commit it to GitHub, you can roll back a migration, edit your migration file, and run it again. So that's kind of a pain. But if you already pushed your code up to GitHub, or to committed your code and pushed that up to GitHub or your shared repository, and you're working with other people, you got to assume that they ran that migration. So your only choice is to create a new migration and fix that. So we'll run our migration with the migrate command, and you can see that created our table there. Now just like before, now we used the scaffold before, but so the scaffold created us a model and a controller and views. Kind of did it all for us. We're just going to do it one piece at a time. So we're creating our model. You see that it created us a migration and a model file. Now, just like before, this model file is mostly empty. It inherits most of its stuff from a base class. So let's go ahead and look at our app to see this stuff. So first, in our database folder, we have this migrate folder, and there is our migration. So if you did misspell a name or put the wrong type, you can, before you run the migration, you can change it and then run the migration. Or if you've already run the migration, you can roll back the migration, change it, and then run the migration again. So once again, migrations are a way to manage your database schema. The schemas are what tables you have and what columns each table has. So because we might have several different databases, each developer working on their own machine uses their own database to develop with. And your production machine that's hosting your live site has its database, and you want to keep those separate. But you want them to have the same schema, so by having code generate your schema for you, you don't have to write down instructions on how to create tables and everything else. So that's why we have migrations. If we're working in a team, we'll commit our migrations to the source code repository. When another developer pulls down our changes, they'll just run the migrate command, and it'll automatically make their database look like our database. And then when we push it to production, our live website, we'll run the migration on the production machine, and the database will match exactly what we have on our development machine. So that's what the migrations are for, and you just saw me run the migration there. And the other file that we have that's of importance is this file right here. And you can see that it is empty. It inherits all of its functionality from this application record class. Now, we look at this application record class, and we have it here in our code, and we could see the only thing that it has is this line here saying that it's an abstract class. That means that we can't instantiate an application record class, but it inherits all of its functionality from active record base. So this is the Rails library that does all of the magic. It handles all of our SQL statements and loading models out of the database and putting them into memory for us to work with, and so a lot of functionality already built in there. So this is a place where we can add some of our own business logic, something that applies uniquely to tasks. Now, after we've created this model and run the migration, back in the console we can run bin rails c, which is short for console. And what this will do, will load up our Rails environment and give us an interactive Ruby shell where we can test out our code and try it out. So if you remember the model view controller framework, and hopefully you go to class to get more information on this, but the model and the controller and the views are should be completely separate from our model. Our model should be able to kind of stand on its own, and then the controller and the views are just the interface to the model. So now that we created this model, this should be a full functional to-do list minus the user interface. And we can actually mock or pretend to use our model through this interactive Ruby console. So we can have a task be our class task.new. Now in Ruby, all class names should be capitalized, so this knows that it's a class name, and we're just going to call the constructor, and we're going to create a task. Okay, so this task has a name, but right now it's nil. It also has a due date and a priority, and they're all nil. It also has an ID, and it's nil as well. So the ID is usually the database ID. So if when you've done databases before, you have an automatic incrementing ID. That's the ID of this task in the database. Now, when the ID is nil, that basically says this task is not saved in the database. It's just a task that exists in memory. So if we quit right now, this task will never get saved to the database. We have to tell the task to save itself in the database. Okay, we can give the task a name. So task from console, and we can give it a due date, and we can say time.zone.now. I'm just saying it's now. This is the easiest way to give it a date, and we can give it a priority. Okay, so now we can ask the task for its name, and now it's, of course, we set that. So basically we went in and set all these fields, but we can also ask the task if it's persisted. It says no. What that means is I'm not saved in the database. If we want to save it in the database, we just go task.save. Now all of that functionality that it inherited from Active Record will automatically generate this SQL statement. So this object right here, it knows its name, due date, and priority. It knows that it's a task. And so when you tell it to save it, it'll automatically generate a SQL statement to save this in the database. So if we're going to go look at our database, we now see one row in the database. Okay, and we can exit the console, and we'll go right back in here. Now that I've exited, this little task, that object, is no longer defined. Okay, but it is in the database, so we can use the task class to pull that object out. So I'll just go t equals task. I can ask for the first task in the database. So this right here, a method inherited it from active record base. You see that it automatically generates the SQL statement. It finds the first task in the database, then it instantiates or creates a task object that has all of that information filled in. So now I can go t.name, and sure enough, it's the name from before. Okay, I can go t.destroy and delete this task out of the database. And now if I go task.first, it'll tell me nil, there's no tasks in the database because I deleted it before. So all that functionality is inherited from the active record base. Some other methods we have is task.all, gives us all of the tasks that we have. And there's some other methods that we can do on our class to be able to pull tasks out. But let's go ahead and create another new task since I don't have any tasks. So I'll go task2 equals a new task, and I could go task2.name equals complete console. Task2.due_date equals time.zone.now, and task2.priority equals 2. Okay, and then we'll just tell that to save itself in the database. Let's see. And I just realized that I was referring back to the task we deleted, so we want to save task2 in the database, and it will run that SQL statement and save that task in the database. Again, we can exit, come back in. Now that the task is saved in the database, we can pull it out. We can go task.all, and it returns. Now when we do all, it's more than one, so this returns an array of tasks. Of course, there's only one element in the array, but we can create another one, and so on. So you can see this model already without writing any extra code. After the generator, the model already is pretty self-sufficient. It can save itself in the database, we can pull it out, we can make changes, resave it in the database, and so on. All right, so back in our code, in our app folder under the models, we have this task.rb. There's not a lot of code here because it inherits most of its functionality, but here's where we can kind of customize tasks for us. And one thing we want to do is we want to make sure that every task has a name. It doesn't make sense to have tasks without names, so we will validate or the name. So and make sure that there is a name there. So these are called validations, and validations are to check the fields before we save something in the database. And we want to make sure that tasks have a name, so please don't save a task that doesn't have a name in the database. There's a lot of other validations you can do. We can check the length of the name. We can make the name a certain format, make sure that it has 3 spaces in it or something like that. We can also check to make sure something looks like an email address if we have emails. We can also validate numbers, make sure they're higher or lower than certain things. We can also validate dates, make sure they're after a certain date. So there's lots of different validations we can add here. And you can look on the Ruby on Rails API, just search for the validations, and you'll find a bunch of different validations that you can add. So once we add that here, we'll go back to the console, and we'll go back into our console. Now, whenever you change your code, your model file or something, if you're already in the console, you need to exit it and re-enter the console because it doesn't pick up the changes. So if you ever change your code while you're already in the console and then you try to see if things are different, it'll still be running your old code. So remember to exit and re-enter your console. So we'll go ahead now and we'll try to create a new task. Okay, And now that we have this new task, we'll save it. We'll try to save it in our database. And if you notice, the task says false right here. That means that the save was not successful, that it was not able to save this in the database. So let's go figure out why. We can go t3.errors. And right here, added onto our object, we have a messages variable, and this is a hash that says the name cannot be blank. So right there we go, oh, it didn't say because the name can't be blank. And notice that's stored with the object. T3 now knows that it has an error on the name field. So we can fix that. T3 name equals finish validations. We'll also give it a due date. And a priority. Now we'll try to save it again. And it worked. So now we can go task.all, give us all the tasks out. And you can see now there are 2 tasks in the database. That we created 3 tasks total, but we deleted 1 out. So now there's 2 tasks, and this is an array of tasks right here. So now, of course, we don't want our users to go into this console and start creating their tasks. We want them to be able to create the tasks through the web, and that's where we need to create our user interface. So all of this was just to show you how our task model works. Now we're going to use this information to help us create our controllers and views. So the next thing we'll do is we'll run our generator again. And we'll create a controller, and we'll call this the tasks controller. So this is a plural name, and the plural name implies that it manages or controls many tasks, or all the tasks in our system. So we'll just start off with an index view right here, and an index action. So we'll go ahead and run that controller. And the files that it created are first the controller itself, and then a view for the index. It also added a route into our routes file to connect this new action, controller in action, to a URL. So the next step we'll need to do is we'll modify that so that we can connect all of the actions, a way to see all of our tasks, a way to create a new task, to view a single task, to update a task, and to delete a task. All right, so now in our app controllers folder, we have another controller, a task controller, and just like when we created our home controller, it has an index action. Now let's go ahead and open up our config routes file, and that's in our config folder right there. And the generator automatically added this right here. So we're going to take that out because we're going to do RESTful routing. So we're going to go resources and call it tasks. So if you want to read more about RESTful routing, see this guide right here. There's a full section on it, and of course, come to class. In class, I will talk about this over and over and over again, so you really need to understand that concept. So we'll open up the task controller, and you should know that the index action is the action that presents all of the tasks in the database. So the code here, what we want to do is we want to take our task and we want to pull out all of them, just like we did in the console. Now we want to save that in a variable, and we'll call this tasks. And notice the plural because there could be more than one. And so this signifies that this is an array of tasks, not a single task. And if we want our views to be able to use this, we need to put an @ sign in front of it. Again, that makes this an instance variable, And the views run inside of this task controller object or class, and they have access to this. So next we'll open up our views, and in the tasks folder we have this index action that was there, and for now we will just call our title method that we had created in the last video, and we'll say this is tasks. And going back and starting up our server, going back to the URL, we'll go to /tasks, and we should see the tasks there. Now, it would be nice to have a little link up here so that we can click on the link and go to our tasks. So let's do that next. And up here, we'll add in another nav link, call it tasks. And that goes to the tasks path. So again, with the RESTful routing, we automatically get a method right here that that generates the URL for our tasks index action. Now, I also noticed we left this hard-coded to /about, so it works, but we can also use the about path right there. Because we used a name route, we can use the about path for that. And so refreshing, we have the about path works, and we have this tasks path that brings us to this index action. Next, let's get our tasks showing up here. So next in here, we will go tasks, or the @tasks, that variable that we created in our controller, and we'll loop through them just with an each right here, and we could call it task. Now, just so you know, this is this back here is a block that we're going to pass to the each method, and the do goes before this. So, and this is the variable, or a variable that we're going to be able to use. This is each task in our thing. So we'll create a div tag. We'll give this a name of task. And we can also give it an ID as well. And we'll call this task underscore right here. And what I want to do is I want to print out the ID of the task here. And this could just help us if we're going to write any JavaScript code to reference different tasks and delete it in the future. Or it could help us a little bit with styling, but we'll probably use this class for any CSS that we'll write. And we'll add a paragraph here, strong. And in here, we'll just do the name and print out our task name, and it's a paragraph, and we'll do another one for the due date and the priority. And refreshing, we see our two tasks that are still in the database. Now, it'd be nice to style these up a little bit better so that we can see that there's actually two tasks. It kind of all looks like one. So let's fix our CSS styling. So up in our app folder, under our assets, we have our style sheets, and we have the task style sheet right here. So we can just use that class. And I'm just going to do something simple by adding a border and solid black. Now you can probably want to do more, and if we go ahead and try this now, it won't work. If we refresh, we don't see any of that. So why is that? And the reason why is because this is an SCSS and we don't import the tasks style sheet. So the different files here are just to kind of help you organize your styles so that you know in the tasks file are all the style sheets that apply to the tasks. And I like this home, that's kind of the styles that apply to the entire site. But we do have to manually import that as well. So doing that, it should fix it. And we'll refresh. And now we have boxes around it. We'll probably put a little bit of margin in there and some other stuff, but let's move on. So next, it would be nice to have a little button down here where we can click and it will bring us to a form to create a new task. So let's add that button on. So down here, we'll just add a link to, we'll call it new task. And the path is a new task path. And again, this is a helper method that determines the URL we want to go to create a new task. And to pay attention to the RESTful routing talked about in class and to figure out how that came in. Now we can also use some classes from Bootstrap, button primary right here to make this look like a button instead of a link. So let's see if that worked. Refreshing down here, sure enough, we have a new task button. It's getting kind of hidden by my footer, which I'll fix that because I did that off camera. But we'll click this new thing here, and now we have this error. Now, if you read, there is no new action in our task controller. So let's go back to our task controller. And sure enough, there isn't a new method or action in here. So we'll just do a new method here. And the only thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an instance of a task that's blank. It's a new task. It's not going to be saved in the database yet. Actually, it will never get saved in the database, but it's a blank, empty task. And our form builder will use this empty model to be able to create a form for someone to create a new task. So after doing that, we get, oh, we're missing our view file here. So let's add that back in. So back down here in our views and our tasks, we only have an index view. So let's create a new file and call that the new.html.erb. And in here we can give it a title, new task, right here. And then we can start doing our form. So we can say form for form with, and we could pass in that empty task model that we created in the controller. And the other thing we need to do is say this is a local form by default. It'll try to submit it using Ajax, which maybe we'll learn later on, but right now we'll just do the basic way to do it. And right there, we have this block right here, and this F is going to be our form builder. So in here, we're certainly free to go ahead and start putting in our own HTML tags, and this will print out the right form tags surrounding our inputs. But this form builder can do a lot for us. So we'll go ahead and use that form builder, and we'll just say we want a text field and for our name right here. And we'll save that, then we'll see how it looks like. And just one thing to note, this change right here, I forgot to put model right there, so make sure if you're following along you add that. And let's see how this looks. So refreshing, now that we have our template in place and we have this form right here, And we can even look at some of the page source to see some of the stuff that Ruby has added in. And notice we have the form tag with the URL. And we also have this input field right here. So we could see that it's actually building our HTML form just the way we want to. One thing though, we're missing our label. And we're also not really styling this really well. So let's go look at our Bootstrap documentation, because Bootstrap can kind of make our forms look really nice, hopefully without a lot of effort. Now I've gone to Bootstrap's website, getbootstrap.com. I clicked on documentation, and you scroll down in the sidebar, and you can see the different components that we have here. And one of the components we have is this forms component. So you click on that and you can scroll through the different things that we can do for forms. There's lots of different ways that we can set up our form, but I like this form horizontal layout right here. So if we look at the HTML that is done to do that, it's quite a bit of HTML. And we look at this HTML right here. Quite a bit of HTML to produce a form that really only has 4 inputs in it. So the full point of Rails is to kind of take out the grunt work or the busy work of typing in a whole bunch of tags to make something work. So we certainly can type in our label tags. We can use the Rails helper to make the form tags. And we can make our form look exactly like this. But there's got to be an easier way than typing all that in, and there is. Now the makers of Bootstrap have created a Ruby library or a gem called Bootstrap Form that with just a little bit of work, and here's some instructions on how to install it, which we'll follow through, but with just a little bit of work, it'll generate all of this HTML right here. So this is great. This is something I feel like I can type in fairly quickly. It keeps me focused on my application, and I don't have to worry about label tags and other stuff. Now make sure you go to this website. Just search for a Bootstrap Form gem. You'll probably come to this GitHub website where you can read all of the documentation on how this works. And there's lots of different things that you can do with your forms. Now what I want to use this for is I want to do horizontal forms right here. This is the form that I showed on the Bootstrap documentation, and this will generate all the HTML that we need to do to create a horizontal form. So the first step will be to install the gem. So right here in our gem file, we need to add in the line gem bootstrap form. And if we look at the documentation, they also include a version number right there. And then after we modify our gem file, we have to run the bundler to install this gem into our application. So in our application directory, we just run the bundle install command, and that should install our gem. And whenever we do that, we have to quit our server and start it up again. Now it also says that up in our assets in our application CSS file, we need to require the Bootstrap CSS. So in here, now this is different than the instructions because we're using an SCSS file. We need to import our Rails Bootstrap Forms CSS. So off camera, I have added the Bootstrap changes in the rest of my fields. One thing to notice, I accidentally said false here. And when I say local true, that means I want to keep it a local form, which means it won't submit it by Ajax. Maybe in the future I'll teach you more about Ajax, but for now we'll just have it submit the normal way. I also added the Bootstrap in front of this right here. I'm using form with, which is a newer way with Rails, but the documentation form 4 will also work. And then we also have the name, the due date, and the priority, and a submit button. So let's see how that looks. And now we have a pretty nice looking form. Without a lot of effort, the amount of code that I had to write to make all of this work was pretty minimal compared with how much HTML was produced. And that's exactly why Rails and other frameworks are so helpful. They do all the little tasks that you don't really have to worry about. You have to worry about it to make it work, but it really kind of distracts you from your main application. When we want to create a form, we want it to be fast and quick. So next thing I want to do is we'll go ahead and try to create a task. We'll go finish task controller and give it a due date, which I'll ignore for now. Eventually I'll put a little pop-up where we can select the date and time, and we can give it a priority. And we create this, and the create action could not be found for the task controller. So let's see what's happening. So sure enough, there is no create method inside of our tasks controller. So let's go ahead and add that. And now, what do we want this method to do? Well, what we want to do is take the stuff they submitted in their form, add it to the task, and then try to save the task in the database. So we'll go ahead and create a new task. Now you might think, well, the task up here, we already created a new task. Why don't we just use this one? Well, that's because each request, we lose all of our variables that we've created. So this drew up a form and returned it to the user, but then after that form's back at the user, he's filling it out. This gets deleted out of memory. It never gets saved in the database, so this task was just there to help the form create the form. It helps the form builder, but we don't actually save this one in the database. Now the person submits all of their information to us, and we can add it into this task thing. So we can go task.name equals params, and there's task params, and we can use the name. So this is kind of like a two-dimensional array. All of the task parameters are sent in here, and then we can do the name, and we can also do the due date and the priority. Now that's going to get a little tedious if we have a lot of different fields. So what we can do is do something called mass assignment, where we take everything they submitted and we just assign all of that to the task in one line of code. So we don't need to do any of this. And actually, this new constructor, we can just pass in all of the params that were inside of that task. Now, this is great, except for we have a security problem, not with the task right here, but if this were, say, users, let's say we let users sign up for accounts, and then the user can go in and they can edit their account, their name or their password and stuff. They can actually modify the form that we sent them and add in fields. And they could add in a admin field, assuming that there's admin. We have a Boolean field on our users that say whether they're admins or not. So they could try to change their status and make themselves as an admin by just adding in a field on the page. And I'll talk more about this in class. So make sure you pay attention to that. But what we need to do is make sure that that doesn't happen. So we're going to create a private function here. Now, all of the functions above these are public functions, meaning that the router can call these functions right here. And in the private area, these are just helper functions to be able to help this. So these aren't pages that the router can call. They're just helper functions. And we're going to create a task params function right here that will return us all the parameters to assign for the task. So we'll take our params hash that we had before, and we're going to require that there be a task. And the fields that we're going to allow are the name, the due date, and the priority right here. So permit there. So what this does is it takes any field that's not in this list and it deletes it out of the hash. So if the user tries to submit an admin field or some field that I don't want him to edit, it'll get taken out. So this is like a white list of fields that the user is allowed to assign. Now this could be a place that causes a lot of bugs, because if you misspell one of these and then when they submit something, the name will always be blank, because it gets because you've misspelled name here, and it never the real name gets taken out and it doesn't assign the name. Also, if later on we add a new field to the task and then we go ahead and add that field onto the form and we submit it and we don't allow it to get through this white list right here, then that new field will never get assigned. So a little bit of work to set up this mass assignment right here, but now we can just call that method task params right here. And so that will call that method and it will return all the params and mass assign them to this task. So after we have do the mass assignment, we just want to see if we can save this task in the database. So task.save. If that works, now we know that the task is saved in the database. And if not, then we know that there's some error messages that they need to clean up. So what do we want to do when it works? Well, we can just redirect them to, and I'm going to call the task path. So this is our index page right here. And we'll also add a notice right here that says the task was created. Okay. So what is a redirect? You could kind of think of it as a function call to this, but that's not really entirely correct. What happens is the server says, oh, the page that you're looking for is when they click the submit button on their form, it comes and calls this create method, and we save it in the database, and then we tell the browser, the page that you're looking for got temporarily moved to the tasks path. So please ask for that page instead. So the browser will see that redirect and make another request. So it made one request for the create, it got the redirect, and it will recreate another request asking for the task path or the /tasks URL, and they'll see this page right here. Okay, so that's a great way if we don't really have any HTML and we want to save the user time. We don't want to just put up a screen saying task created, click on this link to go see them all. This will just make that seamless for the user. They'll click the create button and all they'll see is after they're done, they'll see they're on the index page. Now there might be, oh, did that task really get created? So this is a little message that will pop up on the page. But to get that working, we have to edit our layout file. So in our views layouts application.erb file, somewhere in there, preferably at the top of your page, you'll want to include this code right here. I'll scroll over so you can see it all. But basically what this does is for each message that needs to get displayed, it will loop through them all, creating an alert. And this alert works exactly with Bootstrap's alert components. So you can go on to getbootstrap.com, look at their documentation. Under components, you'll see alert message, and this HTML will pop up. And it'll even have a little button that they can click to dismiss it. Okay, here's the only kind of code that we add. There's two kinds of messages, a friendly message like, yes, that worked great, and a, oops, you did something wrong message. So that's usually the message name. So if the message name is equal to notice, then I just make it the normal blue color. If it's not, that means they did something wrong and they'll get a red message popping on the top of their page. So now that we have both of those working, let's see this in action. So go ahead and create a task, finish controller, and we'll give it a priority, and we'll create the task. And we see that we got an error here. It's just saying no route matches this. We can see it's on that redirect to line, so let's fix that. And I meant to say tasks path right there because it's where all of the tasks are displayed. So a lot of times that singular plural will mess us up. So let's try that one more time. We'll click create. And notice here's that alert right up here. Here's a little X button, and now they know, oh, the task controller is created. And sure enough, there it is. We actually got 2 of them because we submitted that form twice, but yay, it's all working. So far we have the index action that shows all of our tasks done. We have the new action, which gives us a form to create a task. And we have the create action done that creates our tasks. There's actually no HTML there, but there is one thing here, is if I mess up and I don't include a name on the task. Let's go fix that. So right here, if the task can't get saved in the database, that means a validation failed. So what we want to do is represent the form to them and have the fields that they did fill out filled in, and then ask them to fix anything that they messed up on. So the way to do that is we're going to say render the new field right here. So what does this mean? It doesn't call this new action at all. In fact, all as this render does is decide which view to display. Now by default, it would display the create view. And we haven't created a create view, we just have the index and the new. So this one doesn't display a view at all because it just redirects the browser to another action. This one wants to, on this path, it wants to display a view, and I say instead of showing the create view, just use this new view right here, which we get right here. So we're going to get this new view, but the model that we're going to be working with will be the same model that we tried to save in the database. Now this one got blown away or deleted out of memory after the form was drawn up. This one right here will stay in memory for us to be able to draw up the form. So the model it'll use will be that, and it will have all the errors tacked on. So let's see what happens when we do this. So I'll give a task a priority, but I'll accidentally forget to assign a name. And remember, all tasks have to have a name. And we do this again, and we get an error message saying, oh, the name can't be blank. Now it would be nice to have a little bit more of a message up here saying, please fix the errors below. That way it'll be a little bit more clear, but this is actually pretty good so far. So back on our new view, we'll just add in one more thing, and this comes from our bootstrap form helper. We can do an alert message. Now this alert message will only show up if there are errors. And the message I'll say will just be, please fix the errors below. Okay. And one more thing, you have 2 options here, and if you're ever having a need to debug or something like that, this is a good place where you can get more information. But if the error summary is true, then it will list out all the errors in a unordered list above the form. But I'm going to say false because they'll see the errors inside of the form. But if you don't see any errors inside of the form, but you're seeing this error message pop up, and you're like, what's wrong, what's missing? You can change that to true, and it will tell you exactly why that record was not being able to saved in the database. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and try it out. And we'll just say fix errors. And let's try to create that one. And sure enough, now it was created. So now when we try to create a task, we'll see please fix the errors below, and we'll see that. Now if I did say the error summary was true, you'd see right in here we'd see a message, name can't be blank, right here. Now back on our index page, it would be really nice to be able to have a link right here to click on it and see each individual task. So let's do that next. So we can see our index view right here. We do for each task, we print out this div tag, and it has a name. I'm going to make this name a link. So it's going to be link to, and the name, and the URL. There's two options here. We can go task path, and if you notice, this is just one task we want to see. So that's why it's called task path instead of tasks path. Means I want to see lots of tasks. So, and then I can pass in the task right here. Now we can do this, but a shorter way would just be to pass in the task right here. And what that says is what the link to method will do is it'll ask this, what kind of thing are you? It'll say, oh, I'm a task. And then it'll say, okay, what's your ID? And it will be able to create the link right there. Now I'm also going to do like we did in the scaffolding, unless current, right there. So let's see that on our page. And we'll view all of our tasks. And sure enough, now we have links. Now when I try to click on one of that, oh, the show action is not in the task controller. So let's go ahead and add in that show action. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to pull that task out of the database. So we'll just say, we'll save this task, and notice it's just one task here, so I'm not saying tasks, equals task, and notice that's the task model class. And we can ask it to find the task with the ID that they're looking for, and that will be in the URL, and it will be able to pull that ID out, and we'll find that task, and we save it away. That's all the controller method needs to do. So off camera, I'm going to, just for time's sake, I'm going to create the rest of the show page. So what I did is I created a show view, and I just added a title. And now I'm doing the same thing I did in the scaffolding. I went to my index.html and I took out that div tag that was being done in a loop, and I added it into a task partial right here. And then my show page renders one task without partial, and my index page renders an array of tasks using that partial, just like in the scaffolding. So let's make sure all that works. And sure enough, our tasks page, we have all of that with links, and when we click on a link, we see each task. So to finish this, we still need a way to edit our tasks and a way to delete it. So I'm going to add a couple of links only on the show view down here, one to edit it and one to delete the task. So I added 3 links onto the show view, one to edit. And notice it uses the edit task path, and we pass in the task that we're displaying so that it can create the URL, a delete method with the delete method here, and a confirmation, and a link to get back to all tasks. I also decided to add one more link onto our new task form, and it's a cancel link in case they clicked on new task and decided not to create a task. It'll just bring them back to the all tasks path. And I made it look like a button too using the bootstrap helpers. And so let's look at all of that. And when we have the complete, we have the 3 links down here. That goes back to all tasks. We could create a new task, and sure enough, we have a cancel button down at the bottom. So let's go ahead and start working on our edit. We click on edit. Oops, the edit action can't be found. So what this should be is a page with a form to update our task. So we need to create an edit method here. And then the first thing we need to do is get the task out of the database that we want to edit. We can't make the form without knowing the task that we want. We want the form filled in with the information from the form. So we'll pull that task out of the database. And for now, then we'll have to create an edit view. So off camera, I'm going to create the edit form and also the update action right here. And just like with the new action is a form, and the create processes the form and saves it in the database, the edit action is a form, and the update processes the form and saves it in the database. So off camera, I'm going to fill those in with their views. So the first thing I did is I took that form out of the new view because I didn't want to have to repeat myself and drop the form both for the new and the edit. They have the same fields, so I should be able to use the same form. So what I did is I pulled that, I took it out from here and I put it into a partial, just like we did with the task partial right here. This is all the same code that was in the new view, but now it's in the partial. And then back in the new view, I just tell it to render that partial. If you notice, this is a string. So the string is just the name of the partial. So the partial's name form, and I'm going to render the form in the new view. And then I look in my edit, and that makes the edit really easy. We can also add a cancel button down here. And we'll just go to the task and make it look like a button as well. Okay, and so now the new renders the same form as our edit action does right here. And so that's great. Then let's go back to our task controller. And the edit, all it needed to do there. And now the update, kind of a lot like the create. But first we have to pull the task out of the database, and then we could assign each field individually, or in one line right here, the update attributes function right here, which I believe has now been renamed to update in Rails 6. We're going to just update the task params using the same method and the same whitelist. Now, if the update, you didn't want them to say edit the name anymore, you could take the name field out, and of this you can create 2 of these methods, and then the update won't be able to change the name. But we're going to let them edit all of the fields, and if the update works and saves itself in the database, it'll redirect them to the task path, the show view. So just like it did in the create method, and they'll have a little notice saying, hey, it's been updated. If it didn't work, meaning the name was blank, we'll render the edit method. And it does, remember, it doesn't call the edit method, it just chooses the edit view. So we'll redraw up the form using this task that now has errors attached to it, and they'll see the errors. So let's see if all that works. So we'll try to edit this, and let's see what happens if we leave the name blank first. Oh, yep, we get the errors, and put the name back. It's a little bit different, and it says that it's edited. And just to make sure that the new form is still working, yes, that's working as well. Now, we still have one problem. If you notice, this thing says create task, and we're really editing the task. That's going to kind of throw some people off. So let's fix that. So obviously the form is always going to say create task. I'm going to do some Ruby code in here. If the task is saved in the database, then make the button say update task. If not, make it say create task. So that way it works for both the new and the edit actions. And so we'll refresh, and yep, it says update task. And then if we try to create a new task, it'll say create task. So we still have one thing left to do, and that's to be able to delete tasks. And we have the JavaScript working, but when we do that, of course, we don't have the destroy action. So off camera, I'm going to add that in. So I just added a destroy method. we're going to load the task out of the database, tell it to delete itself out of the database. So this is a SQL query to delete this task, and we'll redirect them back to the task path and say task deleted. Now if you notice, I'm just doing this to show you. I'm using an alert right here, whereas this uses a notice. So this is going to be a red box and this will be a blue box. So let's go back and see if we can delete tasks. So I'll click on delete. Are you sure? And now notice a red box up here instead, and the X works. And down here, sure enough that the finish controller, just the finish controller got deleted out of the database. So there's one more thing that we can do. This is all working, but if you notice the show, the edit, the update, and the destroy, the very first thing they do is load that task out of the database. Now it is just one line, but since all of them are doing it, we kind of have to repeat. And if we added other actions that we can do on our task, like maybe mark it completed or uncompleted, there's some more actions that we could add. They too would have to load the task out of the database. So let's create a little private helper method that will load that task out of the database. And really, we're just setting that task variable to be task.find params ID. Okay, and then we can replace this with a load task here and replace all of them. Well, we really swapped one line of code for another line of code by adding another method. But one thing that Ruby allows you to do, and Rails, they have what's called filters, and filters are where we can set up to say, before this method gets called, call this method right here. So what we can do is before action, we will call the load task method. So what that will do is before each and every one of these methods, the public methods that get called, it will, before it gets called, it will first call the load task method right here. And that's great, except for, well, we don't want to load the task on these three methods right here. We only want to load the tasks on these methods down here. So we can add an except and pass in an array of the actions or methods that we don't want to do this on, which are these three methods right here. So now that we have that, now in the show method, we can take this out, that out, and out of all of these methods, take that line of code out, because this before action will call the load task that will do that line of code before these methods ever get called. So to let's just make sure that still works. And sure enough, that works, but now our show method works, our edit method works, and the delete will hopefully still work as well.